My name is Tom Bradley, and I'm about to tell you how my wife's nephew tried to destroy 18 years of my life in one afternoon and how I made sure he regretted every second of it. It was a Tuesday in March when Kyle Sullivan walked into my office at Sullivan Construction with that smug grin I'd grown to hate. At 29, he had everything handed to him. Corner office, six-figure salary, and a business card that read Business Development Director, a title that meant absolutely nothing because he'd never developed a damn thing. "Hey, Uncle Tommy," he said, leaning against my door frame like he owned the place. Which technically his grandfather did. "Heard you've been working on that Alpine resort project. How's it going?" I should have seen the trap right there. Kyle never asked about my work unless he wanted something. But I was tired, having spent the last 4 months flying between Ohio and Colorado, negotiating the biggest contract in our company's 40-year history. $22 million to build a luxury mountain resort. The kind of deal that could set us up for a decade. "Christine Rodriguez signed yesterday," I said, not looking up from my paperwork. "We got it." Kyle's eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "That's fantastic!" I knew my strategy would pay off. I stopped writing. "Your strategy?" "Yeah, the relationship-building approach I suggested. Working the client from multiple angles, you know? Classic business development." I stared at him. Kyle had suggested exactly nothing. He'd never even met Christine Rodriguez. The closest he'd come to the Alpine Resort project was asking me about it in hallway conversations. "Kyle, you weren't involved in this deal." He laughed, that entitled rich kid laugh that made my jaw clench. "Come on, Tommy. We're family, it's a team effort, right? Besides, Grandpa's been asking about my contribution to the big projects." That's when it clicked. Patrick Sullivan Sr., and the company founder and my father-in-law, had been talking about succession planning lately. At 72, he wanted to see the next generation step up, and Kyle, being his eldest grandson, was positioning himself as the heir apparent. I documented every client interaction, every meeting, every contract revision, I said carefully. "Your name isn't on any of it." Kyle's smile never wavered. "Documentation is just paperwork, Uncle Tommy. What matters is results." And I got us results. The sheer audacity took my breath away. But this was just the beginning of what would become an 8-month war that would tear our family apart and nearly destroy everything I'd built. I was about to learn that blood might be thicker than water, but evidence is thicker than both. 3 days later, Patrick Sullivan Sr. called me into the mahogany-paneled conference room that had intimidated subcontractors for 4 decades. The walls were covered with framed photos of completed projects, half of which I'd managed personally. Kyle was already seated, wearing his best respectful grandson expression. "Tom, sit down," Patrick said, his Irish accent still thick after 50 years in Ohio. "I wanted to personally congratulate you both on the Alpine Resort victory." "Both." My stomach dropped. "Kyle's shown real leadership on this project," Patrick continued. "The initiative, the strategic thinking. It's exactly what this company needs from the next generation." Kyle nodded solemnly, like he was accepting a Medal of Honor instead of credit for work he'd never done. "Thanks, Grandpa. I learned a lot working alongside Tom. Working alongside me. I'd seen Kyle exactly 3 times during the entire negotiation process, each time asking for updates like he was checking on a weekend football score. "Patrick," I said carefully, "I think there might be some confusion about roles here." Kyle wasn't involved in the Alpine negotiations. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Patrick's gray eyes narrowed, the same look that had made grown men apologize for late concrete deliveries. "Are you questioning my grandson's contributions, Tom?" "I'm clarifying the record. I have documentation of every client interaction, every meeting, every—" "Documentation," Kyle interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Grandpa, Tom's being modest about my role. I coordinated the overall strategy while he handled the operational details." "Operational details. $22 million reduced to operational details." "That's not accurate," I said, my voice harder than I intended. Kyle had 0 contact with Christine Rodriguez or anyone at Alpine Resort Group. Patrick's face flushed red. "I don't appreciate your tone, Tom. Kyle's been keeping me informed throughout this process. He's shown the kind of big-picture thinking we need." The meeting lasted another 10 excruciating minutes, with Kyle spinning fairy tales about client relationship management and strategic oversight while Patrick nodded approvingly. I sat there watching 18 years of trust and partnership evaporate because blood trumped truth. As we filed out, Kyle caught my arm. "Nothing personal, Uncle Tommy. Just business, except this was family business, which made it infinitely worse. That evening, I sat in my home office surrounded by project files, trying to figure out how to explain to my wife, Rebecca, that her nephew had just committed career suicide. I had no idea that Rebecca would choose family over truth, or that Kyle was just getting started. "Becca, your nephew is a liar and a thief," I said, spreading the Alpine Resort contracts across our kitchen table. My wife Rebecca looked up from her coffee, her face already showing the strain I'd put there. At 48, she'd spent 25 years navigating Sullivan family politics as both daughter and employee. She was VP of Operations, the only woman in company leadership, and she'd earned that position through competence, not genetics. "Tommy, please, Kyle's young. Maybe he just overstated his involvement." "Overstated?" I pulled out my phone logs. He never spoke to Christine Rodriguez. Not once. He never attended a client meeting. He never even read the project specifications. Rebecca's hands trembled as she flipped through the documentation. I could see her internal war playing out. 22 years of marriage versus 60 years of family loyalty. "What do you want me to do?" she whispered. "Dad's already made his decision. I want you to tell the truth. The truth will destroy this family." 3 weeks later, at the annual Sullivan family barbecue, I learned exactly how far Kyle was willing to push his lie. The backyard was full of cousins, aunts, uncles, and their kids. 3 generations of Sullivans celebrating another successful year. I was manning the grill, trying to stay busy and avoid conversation, when I overheard Kyle holding court by the beer cooler. "Yeah, the Alpine Resort deal was intense," he was saying to his cousins Danny and Mike Jr. 4 months of relationship building, strategic planning. Uncle Tommy helped with the paperwork side, but the real work was reading the client, understanding their needs. Mike Jr. nodded admiringly. "Grandpa says you're ready to start taking over some of Dad's responsibilities." "Maybe," Kyle said with fake modesty. "I mean, somebody has to carry this family legacy forward." That's when something snapped inside me. I dropped the grilling tongs and walked over. "Kyle, that's interesting. Tell them about your strategic planning sessions with Christine Rodriguez." Kyle's smile flickered. "Well, you know, confidentiality. Tell them about the database migration challenges you solved. Or the zoning variants you negotiated." The conversation stopped. Everyone was staring. "Uncle Tommy, maybe we shouldn't discuss business at a family gathering," Kyle said, but his voice had an edge. "You're right. Let's discuss lies instead." That's when I made the mistake that nearly cost me everything. "You lying little piece of shit!" I exploded. "I spent 4 months building that deal while you were playing golf." The silence was deafening, and Kyle's victorious smile told me I'd just handed him exactly what he needed. The aftermath of my outburst was swift and brutal. Within hours, Kyle had transformed from lying nephew into sympathetic victim. "I can't believe Tom would attack me like that in front of the children," Kyle told anyone who'd listen. "Over a business disagreement? That's not the Sullivan way." Rebecca barely spoke to me during the drive home. When we got to our house in suburban Cleveland, she finally exploded. "You embarrassed our entire family. In front of everyone!" Her voice cracked. "Dad's furious. My brothers think you've lost your mind." And Kyle, God, Tommy, he looked like a kicked puppy. "He's a fraud, Becca." Everything he said was a lie. Even if that's true, you can't attack a family member at a barbecue. There are ways to handle these things. But Kyle wasn't handling things the Sullivan way. He was handling them like a corporate assassin. Monday morning, I found out just how strategic my nephew-in-law could be. Patrick called me into his office at 7 a.m., his face carved from granite. "Tom, I've been thinking about your behavior at the barbecue." "Patrick, I lost my temper, but Kyle was telling family stories and you assaulted his character in front of children." "That's not the man I hired 18 years ago." I felt the ground shifting beneath me. "I've never given you reason to question my character. Haven't you?" Patrick opened a manila folder. "Kyle's brought some concerns to my attention. Performance issues, attitude problems, resistance to mentoring younger employees, performance issues. I generated more revenue for this company than any other employee in its history." "What kind of performance issues?" "Missing deadlines, client complaints, territorial behavior around projects." Patrick's voice was cold. "Kyle mentioned that Christine Rodriguez specifically requested he take a more active role because you were becoming difficult." The lie was so audacious it took my breath away. Christine Rodriguez had never even heard Kyle's name, much less requested his involvement. "That's not true. Call Christine yourself." "I already have." Kyle handled that conversation. Very professional, very reassuring. The client relationship is secure. Kyle had gotten to Christine first. Whatever he'd told her, it had been convincing enough that she wasn't contradicting his version of events. "Patrick, I have 18 years of documentation. Client testimonials, performance reviews, documentation can be interpreted different ways, Tom. What matters is results and team cohesion. Kyle's shown both. I was being erased from my own career, one lie at a time. Where does this leave me? Patrick's smile was funeral home polite. I think you need some time off. Clear your head. Decide if Sullivan Construction is still the right fit. Time off. In corporate speak, that meant I was fired. That weekend, while Rebecca visited her parents to smooth things over, I sat in my home office and did what I did best. I built a case. 18 years of meticulous record-keeping spread across my desk. Every email, every contract, every client interaction backed up across 3 external drives. If Kyle wanted to play games with documentation, he'd picked the wrong opponent. My first call was to Christine Rodriguez's direct line, not the company number Kyle might be monitoring. Tom, perfect timing, Christine said. I was just reviewing the implementation timeline. When do you want to schedule our kickoff meeting? My heart jumped. Christine, I need to ask you something. Have you spoken with Kyle Sullivan recently? Who? Kyle Sullivan. From our company. He said you'd requested his involvement in the project management. There was a long pause. Tom, I've never heard that name before. Are you being reassigned? Bingo. Kyle had lied about the client conversation, just like everything else. Not exactly. Christine, hypothetically, if someone claimed to have managed our negotiation process, what would your response be? I'd say they were delusional. You've been my only contact for 4 months. Your presentation sold our board, your timeline got approval, and your technical expertise sealed the deal. If Sullivan Construction is changing management on this project, we need to discuss whether we're comfortable moving forward. Perfect. Christine's testimony would demolish Kyle's entire story. Next, I called Carl Peterson, our lead estimator and my closest ally at the company. Carl had 30 years with Sullivan Construction and 0 patience for politics. Tom, what the hell happened at that barbecue? Kyle's been telling everyone you had some kind of breakdown. Carl, I need to ask you about the Alpine Resort project. Did Kyle contribute anything to the estimate or the proposal? Carl laughed bitterly. Kyle? That kid couldn't estimate the cost of a ham sandwich. You did every calculation, every material takeoff, every labor projection. I've got your handwriting on every page of that estimate. 2 witnesses down. But I needed more than testimony. I needed Kyle to destroy himself. That's when I remembered something Kyle had mentioned during one of his hallway visits. His graduate school friend, Danny Martinez, who worked at Alpine Resort Group's corporate office in Denver. Kyle had bragged about having an inside connection at Alpine, someone who could provide competitive intelligence. It was the kind of ethical violation that could end careers, but I'd dismissed it as typical Kyle bullshit. Time to find out if Kyle was actually stupid enough to have tried it. 3 phone calls later, I had my answer, and Kyle Sullivan had just handed me the ammunition to end him. Danny Martinez turned out to be Kyle's roommate from his MBA program at Ohio State. More importantly, he was Alpine Resort Group's procurement coordinator, someone with access to confidential bidding information. Yeah, Kyle called me a few months ago, Danny admitted during our carefully casual phone conversation. Asked about your company's chances on the resort project. Wanted to know who else was bidding, what kind of numbers we were expecting. Did you tell him anything? Danny's voice got nervous. Look, I maybe mentioned that the budget was higher than what most contractors were estimating. Kyle said it would help Sullivan Construction put together a more competitive proposal. Inside information used to underbid competitors. In the construction industry, that was grounds for contract termination and industry blacklisting. Danny, did Kyle ask you to put any of this in writing? He sent me a few emails, yeah. Said he needed documentation for his strategic analysis. I thought it was for some business school case study or something. Kyle had created a paper trail of his own ethical violations. The kid was even dumber than I'd thought, but I needed one more piece of evidence before I could spring the trap. Rebecca came home Sunday evening, her face drawn with exhaustion. I talked to Dad. He's willing to consider bringing you back if you apologize to Kyle and agree to work under his supervision. Work under Kyle's supervision. The kid who couldn't read a blueprint was going to supervise the man who'd built half of Cleveland's commercial district. What did you tell him? I told him I'd discuss it with you. She sat down heavily. Tommy, maybe it's time to consider other options. Other companies. Other companies won't take kindly to hiring someone Patrick Sullivan says has attitude problems. Rebecca's silence confirmed what I already knew. Patrick's word carried weight in Ohio's construction industry. He could effectively blacklist me with a few phone calls. There might be another way, I said carefully. What kind of way? The kind where Kyle faces consequences for his actions. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. What are you planning? I'm planning to tell the truth, with evidence. Monday morning, I called Christine Rodriguez again. Christine, I need to schedule a conference call with you, Patrick Sullivan, and Kyle. There are some project management issues we need to clarify. What kind of issues? The kind that could put your company at legal risk if they're not addressed immediately. By Wednesday, I'd have Kyle, Patrick, and Christine on the same call, with Carl Peterson as a witness. Kyle wanted to play corporate games. Time to show him how they're really played. Wednesday's conference call was scheduled for 2 p.m. I arrived at Sullivan Construction at 1:45, walking into the building I'd helped make profitable for the first time in 2 weeks. The receptionist, Janet, gave me a sympathetic nod. Word traveled fast in a family business. Patrick's conference room felt like a courtroom. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, Kyle to his right wearing his best serious businessman expression. Carl Peterson sat across from them, his weathered hands folded, eyes unreadable. Tom, Patrick said coldly. Christine's joining us in 15 minutes. I hope you're ready to clear up whatever confusion you've created. I'm ready to clear up several confusions, I replied, opening my laptop. Kyle leaned forward. Grandpa, I think Tom's been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe we should reschedule until he's feeling more stable. The psychological warfare was clever, but I'd expected it. At exactly 2 p.m., Christine Rodriguez's voice filled the room through the conference speaker.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Tom, you mentioned some urgent project management issues. Christine, I need to clarify the management structure for the Alpine Resort project. There seems to be some confusion about who negotiated this contract. Kyle jumped in smoothly. Christine, I've been meaning to follow up on our previous conversations about the implementation timeline. Dead silence from the speaker. I'm sorry, who is this? Christine asked. Kyle Sullivan, Business Development Director. We've spoken several times about the strategic framework for this project. Another pause. Mr. Sullivan, I have no record of any conversations with you. Tom Bradley has been my sole point of contact throughout this entire process. Kyle's face went pale, but he rallied quickly. Perhaps you spoke with my assistant. I coordinate client relationships at the executive level. What assistant? And what executive level conversations are you referring to? Patrick was staring at Kyle now, the first crack appearing in his granite confidence. Christine, I said, can you tell everyone about the database migration challenges we discussed in February? Absolutely. You identified 3 critical integration points that our IT team had missed. Your technical analysis saved us at least 6 months of delays. Kyle, Patrick said quietly, refresh my memory about the database migration issues. Kyle's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Well, I focused more on the strategic overview while Tom handled the technical details. What strategic overview? Christine's voice had turned sharp. Mr. Sullivan, I'm beginning to think there's been some serious misrepresentation here. That's when I played my ace card. Christine, you should also know that Sullivan Construction received confidential bidding information through Kyle's personal connection at your corporate office. The silence in the conference room was deafening. Kyle looked like he'd been hit by a truck. What bidding information? Christine's voice cut through the speaker like a blade. Mr. Sullivan, are you saying someone at Alpine provided confidential procurement data to your company? Kyle finally found his voice. That's a misunderstanding. I might have mentioned having a contact at your company, but you mentioned it to me, I interrupted, pulling out my phone. March 15th, hallway conversation outside the estimating department. You said, and I quote, "Don't worry about the competition, Uncle Tommy. I've got an inside track on what Alpine's really willing to spend." Patrick's face had turned the color of old concrete. Kyle, is this true? Grandpa, I was just trying to help the company. My friend Danny works there. And your friend Danny Martinez, I continued, procurement coordinator at Alpine's Denver office. He confirmed that you asked for confidential budget information and that you requested he document your conversations via email. Christine's voice was ice cold. We're going to need to see those emails immediately. If Sullivan Construction obtained confidential procurement information, this contract is void and will be pursuing legal action. Kyle was sweating now. Wait, Christine, I can explain. You can explain to our legal department, she snapped. Tom, I need you to email me every communication Kyle had with anyone at Alpine Resort Group. Kyle never communicated with anyone at Alpine, I said, except Danny Martinez, who violated company policy by sharing confidential information. Patrick was staring at his grandson like he'd never seen him before. Kyle, in my office. Now, Grandpa, let me explain now! Carl Peterson, who'd been silent throughout the carnage, finally spoke up. Christine, for what it's worth, Kyle Sullivan had zero involvement in this project until 3 days ago when he started taking credit for Tom's work. Every calculation, every specification, every client interaction was Tom Bradley. I know, Christine replied. Tom, I'm flying to Cleveland tomorrow. We need to meet face to face to discuss how to salvage this situation. After she hung up, Patrick stood slowly, his 72 years suddenly visible in his stooped shoulders. Tom, I owe you an apology. You owe me more than that, Patrick. Kyle made one last desperate play. Grandpa, Tom's trying to destroy our family over a business disagreement. He's been planning this attack for weeks. Patrick turned to his grandson with an expression I'd never seen before, pure disgust. Kyle, you're fired. Clean out your office and turn in your company credit card. You have 1 hour. You can't fire me. I'm family. Family doesn't lie. Family doesn't steal. And family sure as hell doesn't commit federal crimes. Kyle's firing sent shockwaves through the Sullivan family. By Thursday morning, my phone was buzzing with angry calls from Rebecca's relatives. Michael Sullivan, Kyle's father and Rebecca's older brother, was the first to attack. Tom, you destroyed my son's career over petty jealousy. He made one mistake and you crucified him. One mistake, I said. Michael, your son committed procurement fraud, lied to clients, and tried to steal credit for 18 months of work. He's 29 years old. He was trying to prove himself. That afternoon, Rebecca came home from work with red-rimmed eyes. 3 of her cousins had cornered her in the parking lot, calling me everything from vindictive to family destroyer. They're saying you set Kyle up, she whispered, that you deliberately fed him information so he'd hang himself. I used Kyle's own words and actions against him. That's called evidence, not entrapment. Kelly Walsh quit today rather than work for the company while you're still here. Danny's wife won't speak to me. Mom called me crying, saying you've torn the family apart. The price of victory was becoming clear. Friday morning, Christine Rodriguez arrived from Denver. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop near Cleveland Hopkins Airport, away from Sullivan family politics. Tom, I need to understand something, she said. Did Kyle Sullivan ever have any legitimate role in this project? None whatsoever. He learned about the contract 3 days after I signed it and immediately started claiming credit. Christine shook her head. In 20 years of business, I've never seen anything this brazen. The good news is that Alpine still wants to work with Sullivan Construction, specifically with you. What about the procurement information? We're handling Danny Martinez internally. He's been terminated and we're considering legal action. But the information he provided was budget estimates, not proprietary technical data. Unethical, yes. Criminal, probably not. And Kyle's name is being circulated through our industry network. He'll never work in commercial development again. That evening, Patrick called me into his office. The man who'd built Sullivan Construction from nothing looked exhausted. Tom, I'm making you Senior Vice President of Operations, effective immediately. 15% salary increase, profit sharing, and succession planning. What about Rebecca? She keeps her VP title. You'll be working together, assuming she can separate family from business. And Kyle? Patrick's jaw tightened. Kyle is forbidden from company property. If he shows up, I'll have him arrested for trespassing. The war was won, but the casualties were mounting. 6 months later, the true cost of my victory became clear. The Alpine Resort project was a massive success. We delivered on time, under budget, and Christine Rodriguez recommended us for 2 additional contracts worth $38 million. Sullivan Construction was thriving, but the Sullivan family was fractured, perhaps permanently. Michael Sullivan hadn't spoken to me since Kyle's firing. Kelly Walsh and 2 other cousins had found jobs with competing companies, taking years of institutional knowledge with them. Rebecca's mother, Mary Sullivan, spent her final months believing I'd destroyed her grandson's future out of spite. At Mary's funeral in November, the family split was visible. Half the relatives embraced Rebecca and me, acknowledging that Kyle had brought his downfall on himself. The other half treated us like pariahs, whispering about my vendetta against a young man who'd made innocent mistakes. Kyle himself had moved to Phoenix, working as a low-level sales rep for a plumbing supply company. His MBA and his famous name meant nothing outside Ohio. Word travels fast in the construction industry, and his reputation followed him everywhere. Rebecca struggled the most. She'd chosen our marriage over family loyalty, but the cost weighed on her daily. I know you were right, she told me one evening. But did it have to be so complete? Kyle's life is destroyed. Kyle destroyed his own life, I replied. I just documented it. You could have handled it quietly, talked to Dad privately, given Kyle a chance to confess. Kyle had 18 years to earn respect through merit. He chose theft instead. The hardest part was admitting Rebecca might be right. I could have found a way to expose Kyle without humiliating him publicly. But watching him steal credit for my life's work had triggered something primal in me. A need not just for justice, but for total victory. Patrick Sullivan passed away 2 years later. leaving the company to Rebecca and me as equal partners. In his final weeks, he told me that firing Kyle was the hardest decision he'd ever made, but also the most necessary. That boy learned everything wrong about business, he said. He thought family meant privilege instead of responsibility. Today, Sullivan Construction employs over 200 people. We've built hotels, shopping centers, and office complexes across 3 states. Kyle's name appears nowhere in our company history. Sometimes I wonder if there was another way, a path that preserved both justice and family unity. But then I remember Kyle's smug smile as he stole 18 years of my work, and I know I'd make the same choice again. Some prices are worth paying. Some battles are worth winning, even when victory tastes bitter.